Cool, man. How you doing?
Good,
Jeff.
good. Welcome. Well, anyways, I'd like to welcome you to the Buxton National Historic Site Museum. My name is Spencer Alexander, and I am the assistant curator.
Mr. Spence, my first impression of him was, this old white guy that's ready to give us like a tour of this museum, and that's it, you know.
I thought it was Indian. I thought it was a black Indian, man. I wouldn't be surprised if some people mistaking him for white.
I'm also a sixth-generation Underground Railroad descendant, a descendant of some of the early settlers here to this settlement.
He's actually of African-American descent and African-Canadian descent, and which is someone completely different to what I had in mind when I first seen him, so I apologize deeply.
Now, this settlement was founded November 28, 1849 by Reverend William King. He was a white Presbyterian minister born in Londonderry, Ireland. Okay. And he married into a slave-holding family. So as a result of marriage, deaths in his wife's family, him purchasing properties, and other circumstances, he ended up owning 15 slaves. So that went against his religious convictions, so he and some men formed what was known as the Elgin Association, named after Lord Elgin, and they purchased a 9,000-acre tract of land here in southwestern Ontario to set up a settlement to assist fugitive slaves and free blacks fleeing oppression in the United States.
Knowing that Buxton was the first place that the slaves went to be free, like that was the first freedom place, you know, for slaves anywhere, you know, and that's big, you know, that's huge.
I just thought, you know what I mean, like, dang, like, white people didn't help anybody anywhere. But when I came to Canada, I found out that the black slaves were actually bought by other slave owners, but they were brought up here to be free.
Now, you can read about slavery since the recorded history of man, but in the mid-1400s, for the lack of a better word, the business of slavery began to change. In 1441, Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal funded a fleet of ships to explore the west coast of Africa. His main reason for doing that, he was looking for gold. So these west coast tribes would go inland, get the gold, bring it back to the coast and trade with the Europeans. Later on, the demand for slaves became greater than the demand for gold. So these west coast tribes would go inland, war on inland tribes, capture people, march them back to the coast, and sell them to the Europeans in exchange for guns, ammunition, rum. So what it boils down to is the quest for wealth and power by all who profited from the slave trade. It wasn't until 50 years after the Europeans first set foot on the west coast of Africa did those chieftains allow them to build their first fort, which was called Almena, which means a mine in Spanish, but eventually you had Spanish forts, Dutch forts, British forts, French forts all along the coast. Those who made it to the coast would be held there until a slave ship arrived, and then when one did, they'd be loaded on board. Now, this particular ship has 4 different levels of bunks underneath the deck of that ship. So these are people packed in like sardines for those 4 different levels.
I don't see how they did it.
The exact size of a bunk was 2 foot wide by 2 foot high by 6 foot long. And if they captured more people than they had bunks, they may cram 2 into 1 bunk.
You're putting men, women, children in these bunks that are not even, you know, regular size.
Some ships pack you in a crouch position, that way you get more in.
I don't even like to be in a car where the seat is too far back, where I feel entrapped in it a little bit, you know what I mean?
They would separate all family members, they would separate the men from the women, and as best they could, they would separate anybody who speak the same language. All these tribes spoke different languages. That way, if you can't communicate with the people closest to you aboard this ship, there's less chance you can make plans to try to take it over.
And when me and Yoshi even tried to attempt to fit in it, he couldn't even get through the whole thing.
We literally had to position ourselves like on our side, like you're just laying on the sides of your body. Like it wasn't like we could be on our back.
He couldn't even get his whole body in because I was like, man, no, this is crazy. You know, I didn't even want to continue it because how? Like, how could somebody see that in front of them and be okay with it?
So they'd be getting sick, throwing up, going to the bathroom, having to lay in their own waste, and all that would be dripping down on the people in the lower bunks.
All their germs, everything was just, you know, would go down from one bunk to the next bunk to the next bunk.
There have even been accounts of people in bottom bunks drowning in human waste.
it was the worst of the worst, like, condition that you could be in. That was the worst ride to anywhere. It had to be.
So if you survive that trip across the Atlantic Ocean, that was known as the Middle Passage. And in good weather, that trip's going to take you 9 weeks. Bad weather, it could take up to 3 months. And you made it to America, sooner or later, you were going to end up on the auction block. You'd be made to stand up there and people would be checking you out, seeing how healthy you are, similar to how people buy horses and livestock, and somebody would purchase you and take you back to the plantation. Now, there was slavery in Canada. We were part of the British Empire. Yeah. The law was passed to abolish slavery throughout the British Empire in 1833, but it did not take effect until August 1st, 1834.
Hearing that there was slaves in Canada, like slavery went on in Canada, was just like, you know, wow.
These are actual adult ankle shackles from slavery. So there's a little piece missing out of that.
Yeah. They're not even evenly cut.
Now, like a wrist is round, you know what I mean? So
you can see that's going to be cutting into a man's ankle.
So it's no leverage, it's no flexibility in that, because it's hard and it's iron.
One will be scarring up one ankle, and then, you know, it's like, I don't know, like it's...
It was just slapped on, and you was in pain, you were bleeding, but guess what? You were shipped on the way. Wherever they wanted you to go, that's where you were being shipped.
So it's a wonder anybody survived that trip on that ship. You're going to have open wounds, you got all this stuff dripping in there.
How brutal, what condition that you already uncomfortable being packed in like sardines. Then you got on shackles that don't even fit.
It was just crazy, man. Like, I think that was the realest it got.
Now these are a pair of children's ankle shackles from slavery. Those are adult, these are children. And these were last used on a 12-year-old boy.
How? Like, how could somebody see that in front of them and be okay with it, you know? But, like, yeah, I think that's a part of the trip, out of this whole thing, that kind of, like, put a tug on my heart.
Now, right from the beginning, people were trying to escape, and if you got caught, punishment was severe. You saw the picture of the man's back in the hallway after it's healed, and it still looks a mess. When you say another form of punishment, that would be locked around your ankle, and wherever you were working, you'd have to lug this around with you.
Yeah.
So if you thought about running with that on, it's going to slow you up quite a bit. You wouldn't want to think about running, having to lug something like that around with you. Another form of punishment is an iron collar. This would be fastened around your neck tightly like a choker necklace. Oftentimes they would put links of chain or bells and fish hooks on this part, in case if you still try to run away with this on, they're going to hear you. And the fish hooks would get caught up in the reeds of the swamp or the underbrush of the forest you were trying to hide in. You can't say that all masters would be what one would call cruel. Yeah. Some might have even been considered kind, but one thing to remember, if you were a slave, nothing in your life was for sure. Yeah. If that kind master ran into financial trouble,
guess what? He
could take your husband, your wife, son, your daughter, and sell them at any time to get that money.
During the tour, we went to the barn, we went to the schoolhouse, and we walked around the main facility, the center. We didn't go that far, but it seemed like he took me all through time. Like, I could just envision everything because how direct he was. Like, he got to the base of, like, the history of North Buxton, and I just really appreciate having the opportunity for somebody who actually descended telling me the story like it was told to them. I mean, North Buxton was just one experience that I'll never forget.
Being born here would have made me feel a bit more, you know, proud. Not to say I'm not proud, but it just made me, it would just give me more reason to, you know, to believe in my country and be like, okay, Canada is just not Canada. Canada's coming from a very deep place.
But just meeting Jelly and seeing life through her eyes and just experience her history and kind of finding things out she didn't know about her own history, it kind of just let me know that, I mean, it don't matter where you from, man. If you're African American, you have a little bit, if you have 20%, 10%, 15, 5, 1%, we share some kind of history, and we that's nothing that we're gonna forget, the enslavement of our people.